Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
A note to listeners: the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
I actually represented Colt in 2010 on a criminal case. I think he had just turned 18, maybe 3 or 4 months before he got charged with a crime, and I handled it. So yeah, I remember when it happened and the search and following that, and obviously they were never found, but because it came to my attention that Chris Bryant has basically been conducting a witch hunt at the jail and has been essentially interrogating his own staff members, trying to figure out who talked to me. And so I had multiple people reach out because they were concerned.
It's really frustrating because just when you think there's people that you can trust and then you find out you can't. It's been that way for 9.5 years now. You confide in these people and then find out I made a mistake.
We just wanted to give you a quick podcast programming announcement. Since next week is Thanksgiving, we will not be posting an episode the Friday after Turkey Day, but we will be back the following Friday, so stay tuned. We're very thankful to all of our listeners and wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving.
Last week, we were informed about the illegal bugging in the Carter County Jail's attorney interview room, and we reached out to the local defense attorney who discovered this and sent out a press release with his findings.
If this information is true, it's very troubling on many levels, even if it doesn't affect Molly and Colt's case. But we still have so many questions, so that's why we're very happy to have Ardmore attorney Jason May on the podcast today.
Hey, Jason, how you doing? This is Rob and Cindy Dorfman. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you guys?
Good. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and on our podcast, and we appreciate you doing this. So
You're very welcome.
Yeah. So first off, I just wanted to commend you. I mean, I was looking you up online. You have a lot of great reviews. All your clients love you.
Well, most of them, but probably not all of them. But
Well,
I think
you
a large
had,
percentage.
yeah. Well, I mean, out of the review, I would say you got like a 90%. But for the most part, everyone seems to really like the work you do for them.
Well, I appreciate that.
Like I was saying before, we've been doing this podcast now. We actually did a television documentary for Oxygen on the Molly Miller and Colt Haynes case in 2018, and we just got very familiar with the case and Paula Fielder, who is the cousin of Molly Miller. So we've been doing a deep dive on this for the past 27 weeks. So once a week, we've been putting out a podcast and trying to figure out what happened to those two young people. And one of the things that we did when we were doing the documentary is we went and talked to some of the local law enforcement. Person that was in for Joe Russell was Marty Grisham, who had just taken the role not too soon after. So he didn't really feel comfortable talking to us, but we did speak to Chris Bryant, and we had an interview with him, and he had just got into office then. This last week, where these news came out about the bugging in the attorney room was really troubling to us, because we've been getting contacted a lot during this podcast from a lot of civilians and people that live there, and also people that work both at the Love County Sheriff's Office and the Carter County Sheriff's Office, telling us that we need to look into those two departments because there's a lot of corruption going involved. And, obviously with the case with Molly and Colt, there was a lot of corruption that got unearthed after the fact, and things that just weren't really copacetic. It's interesting to have you on because you've been an attorney there, a defense attorney primarily, correct?
Yes, that's all I do is criminal defense.
Fantastic. So you've dealt with these people for the past 13 years.
Right. And I'm from here as well.
Yeah, so why don't you just tell us a little bit of background about yourself and tell us how you grew up there and your legal
Sure.
profession there. That would be great.
Sure. So I grew up in Lone Grove, which is just a few miles outside of Ardmore. Went to college at Southeastern, which is in Durant, Oklahoma. I went to law school at the University of Oklahoma, graduated in 2009. I had some job offers for law firms and decided that I didn't really want to work for someone else. So I ended up just moving back to my hometown and opening up a practice right out of law school. And when I first started, I did a little bit of everything. Basically, if someone would pay me, I would take the case. And I slowly whittled that down to things that I enjoyed. And for probably the last 5 to 6 years, I've done nothing but criminal defense.
Okay, and what are some of the things that you're defending people against down there?
Oh, I do everything from, public intoxication to murder.
Wow, that's pretty broad range.
Yep.
Did you hear about the Molly and Colt case?
I did. I actually represented Colt in 2010 on a criminal case. I think he had just turned 18, maybe 3 or 4 months before he got charged with a crime, and I handled it. So yeah, I remember when it happened and the search and following that, and obviously they were never found. But
what was Colt like? We've only spoken to some friends and family, but from your standpoint and working with him on his case,
from what I remember, he was kind of shy. I don't remember him being very loud or anything like that. He seemed like a good kid. I mean, he was just basically a child when I represented him.
Yeah, that's what's unfortunate about this whole thing is that these kids were very young. And as time goes by, people forget that they were human beings who were just kids.
Right. And, a lot of people make bad decisions when they're 18 years old. So that just because you're charged with a crime doesn't mean you're a bad person or anything like that.
What's the climate down there? Can you kind of paint a picture for us since you are a local, and what's it like down there? I mean, we spent some time down there, but from a local's perspective and someone who actually is dealing with the law and dealing with a lot of the criminal law down there, can you paint a picture for us?
Well, we have high crime rate down here. It's not as bad as it was. I mean, at one point we had the highest crime rate in the United States per capita for, I think, 2 or 3 years in a row.
Wow.
So that was, and you wouldn't expect that in a small rural area like this. And that number has come down some, but I mean, we still have a very high crime rate compared to other towns in areas this size. Law enforcement, I don't, I'm not going to say that all law enforcement's bad or all law enforcement's good. I think the majority of police officers down here are honest and just want to do their jobs, but we definitely have some bad apples that kind of give a bad name to everybody. And I guess we're seeing more of that right now with the issue at the jail.
Yeah. Do you want to take us through that and how you found about that? Because we're not surprised, to be perfectly honest, knowing all the characters down there and knowing a lot of the people down there. But that took it to another level when we heard about that.
Yeah, it was surprising. I think I was the first attorney to publicly support Chris Bryant when he first ran for sheriff in, I believe it was 2016 that he ran. I donated money to him before the scandal of his predecessor came out publicly. So I certainly at the beginning had high hopes for him. I was contacted, I believe October, it was mid-October, I think the second or third week of October, by a person who works at the Carter County Jail. And they informed me that they had found what they believed to be a recording device in the attorney room there. And they were concerned about it for obvious reasons. So after I learned that information, I went to the jail myself and inspected the light fixture in the attorney room. And once I looked for it, it was obvious what it was. I mean, there was no question that it was a recording device that had been installed there. Now, I had no idea that it had been there apparently for the last 20 years. That was information that Chris Bryant volunteered when he released the statement to the news. I mean, that's the same room that I have used in the 13 years I've been practicing law, but I guess I probably have just never looked up when I've been in that room. Because once you look up, there were 8 screws that held the light fixture cover in place. One of those screws had been removed and you could see the camera underneath the screw. You could also see visible wires underneath the glass. And then there was another smaller hole that looked like it had a microphone underneath it. So it was apparent that it was, bugged for video and audio.
Wow. We're not surprised, but that is shocking. And can you just help us understand, what does that mean for someone like yourself if you were being recorded this whole time, every time you go in there?
Sure. So, I mean, that room is specifically for attorneys to meet with their clients. So that is the only place in the jail where a defendant has an expectation of privacy, because the 5th and the 6th Amendments to the United States Constitution, as well as the Oklahoma Constitution, guarantee all criminal defendants, anyone accused of a crime or charged with a crime, to have the right to effective counsel and to communicate with that counsel. And so for me, I mean, it really damages my ability to do my job, because going forward, if people are concerned that that room may not be private, I may be in a situation where clients don't want to be forthcoming with me about things I need to know in order to defend them. And looking back on the conversations I've had in that room, it's really impossible to say how someone listening in may have affected things in the past. I mean, it's not as cut and dried as them possibly using information that they learned, but even things like plea agreements. I mean, if the district attorney has knowledge of whether or not my client is going to accept a plea agreement, then that takes away our leverage as far as negotiating.
Wow. Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question is, legally, what are the ramifications for that being discovered? And also, do you think the DA's office knew about it as well?
I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't have any evidence to suggest that they know about it. However, common sense would seem to tell me that they would be the entity that would benefit most from that bug being there. So I hope there's a thorough investigation. At this point, I don't think that is happening. So I'm hoping that as more publicity is brought forth and as more information comes to light, that at some point, some law enforcement agency will actually take this seriously and conduct a full investigation.
What gives you the impression that they're not looking into this?
So Chris Bryant, in his statement, said that he had asked the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation to investigate this matter. I emailed them on Thursday. I emailed a contact that I know there who doesn't deal with that department, but I asked her if she would pass an email along to whoever was handling the investigation, because it came to my attention that Chris Bryant has basically been conducting a witch hunt at the jail and has been essentially interrogating his own staff members, trying to figure out who talked to me. And so I had multiple people reach out because they were concerned that he had been doing that. And he had also been basically telling them that if they saw anything, that they should lie about it if asked by anyone. And so I sent that information along to OSBI and asked if we could set up a meeting. And I received a response that the only thing they are investigating is the manufacture date of the recording device and whether it was functional, and that they had not been asked to conduct any further investigation. And so that was the extent of their involvement.
Wow.
Which it does seem odd that it looks like they're letting Chris Bryant, who should be the suspect in their investigation, determine what they're allowed to investigate.
It seems to be what happens down there with these sheriffs. I mean, it seems to be what happened with Joe Russell, too. They just let him make decisions like that. When we met Chris Bryant, we had asked him about Molly and Colt, and he was very guarded about it, which we thought was strange, considering it was 8 years later, and
Right.
It's a cold case.
And he wasn't involved in the initial investigation.
So
Right, I can't imagine, he would have had any involvement at all.
Exactly. So it wasn't very helpful. But, I mean, I think that's really strange that the OSBI would just kind of take his lead.
Well, the other question I had for you is that why did he remove it? Why didn't he call the OSBI and have them come down and remove it?
So I have a theory on that. So the night before I issued my press release, I notified a couple local attorneys about what was coming, just to give them a heads up since they had clients who were in that jail. And I believe that one of those attorneys tipped off Chris Bryant that I was going public the next day, because I have also learned from someone who works in the jail that he did not discover the device after I went public, as he claimed, but between midnight and 1 a.m. earlier that morning. So I released my statement, I think, between 10:30 and 11 a.m. on the 9th. And he actually went to the jail between midnight and 1 a.m. on the 9th. So about 10 to 11 hours before I went public, and apparently removed the device. And then he claims that he discovered the device after I went public. So my theory on that is that he went there, removed whatever device was there, and either replaced it with some outdated device that no longer would work, or just removed it so that he could then turn over a different device later.
Yeah, that seems a little fishy.
A little bit.
Yeah. And then he was very quick to attribute this to his ex-father-in-law, who's now deceased. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Harvey Burkhart was the sheriff in 2002. Supposedly, this was put in there at his direction because there was a case where there was a man in jail whose mother happened to be an attorney. And she apparently, for whatever reason, thought it would be a good idea to smuggle a hacksaw blade into the jail so that he could, I guess, cut his way out of the bars. And so supposedly that camera was put in there as some sort of a sting operation to catch her smuggling things into her son. And there are a couple of problems with that. The sheriff doesn't have the authority to bug that room without a warrant. And there was, to my knowledge, there was never a warrant issued. Harvey Burkhart is deceased now, so he can't defend himself. And I've seen some recent posts from some of Harvey Burkhart's family members saying that Mitchell Sperry was the district attorney who authorized that camera to go in there. And that's also problematic because Mitchell Sperry is also deceased. He was the district attorney before Craig Ladd took office. But additionally, district attorneys just do not have the authority to do that. It would have to be a court order. And even if that story were legitimate, that would be removed immediately. It's not something that you're going to leave up there for 20 years.
Yeah, I think it would be just an a la carte type of thing where you put it up there, then you, when it was functional for what the case was, then you remove it afterwards.
Right. That would seem like the common sense solution to that.
Going back to what I was asking before, legally, if this isn't properly investigated, what's the next course of action?
To be honest with you, it is so far reaching, it's hard for me to even fathom how far this could go. I mean, potentially every criminal defendant who met with an attorney in that room in the last 20 years not only has a civil rights suit that they could file against the county, but you could also see, hundreds or even thousands of criminal cases reopened.
Wow, there's a big ripple effect with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was shocked that Chris Bryant admitted so readily that it had been there that long, because as soon as he issued that statement, he just opened the county up to who knows how much civil liability.
Well, that begs the question, how did he pinpoint it to 2002?
I don't know. He said he talked to an employee who remembered putting it in there, but it did seem to happen very fast. I mean, I think he issued that statement within a couple hours of my press release going out.
Coincidence? I don't think so.
Why do you think there's so much crime in that area for that per capita? It seems kind of strange.
I think part of it is where we're located. We're halfway between Dallas and Oklahoma City. So I think this is kind of a stopping off point for a lot of organized crime and gang activity. And then, of course, we have the usual, meth problems and theft that arises as a result of that.
And then did you have any experience dealing with Joe Russell during your tenure?
A little bit, not much. He didn't do a lot of arrests himself. He was more of the political sheriff versus one who was actually out there on the streets. I did not deal with him a lot.
Well, obviously we've gotten, since we're doing the podcast and obviously in the television show, a lot of people have come out to us who have had run-ins with him. Mm-hmm. And obviously, he had to step down because of stuff that was happening at his house with his son. Now, regardless of whether or not he was guilty of any of that, he was probably aware of that. So how does that mix in this community where you can't trust law enforcement?
Well, it's a problem. I mean, we've had one sheriff in Carter County and one sheriff in Love County removed from office for basically corruption. And then now we have this incident. So I could certainly see how it would be hard for the average public to feel like they could trust law enforcement around here right now.
And have they told you what kind of measures they're going to do now in that attorney room? I mean, how could you feel any trust that you can speak to your clients in that jail without them listening?
I have not received any information regarding anything they intend to do. Also have not tried to go back to the jail since I went public. I figure they might not want to see me over there right now. So
yeah, that was my next.
Probably go visit.
That's my next question. What kind of blowback are you receiving? Because it seems like there's a good old boy network down there that kind of protects their own.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about it. I mean, the next time I need to go visit a client, I'm going to go visit a client. They can't keep me out. I mean, I have a constitutional ability to access my clients. So I'm sure it'll be a little awkward, but that's fine. I don't do this job to make friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But could you ask them to get an independent bug sweep of that room before you go in there?
I'm sure I could. I don't know that that's necessary. I can't imagine that they would be stupid enough to have anything in there right now, but I would definitely take a close look.
And when someone's civil rights are violated like that, and you have the OSBI, who you said aren't really looking into it, they're just looking into the technical aspects of the bug and seeing
Right.
if it was working or if it was dilapidated, or who else could you bring in to investigate this then?
So let me say one thing. The OSBI is kind of limited. They have very specific rules that they have to follow. And so they are only allowed to investigate things that they have been specifically requested to investigate, unless it falls within a couple exceptions. Now, one of those exceptions is public corruption. So I would argue that qualifies here. So hopefully at some point they will launch a full investigation. But at this point, I don't think any agency is looking into it. I have notified the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General's office. So I have reached out, but so far I haven't received any callbacks or responses at all from any of those agencies.
Well, it sounds like you're doing everything that you need to do in order to vet this out and find answers. So thankfully, there are people like yourself down there that are doing that.
Hopefully something will come of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we've seen over the years doing this case, that it seems like things just kind of go away once everybody knows there's corruption or something happening.
And I hope it doesn't, but one thing I'm confident in is the voters down here. And Chris Bryant's up for re-election in 2 years, and I'm sure he's going to have an opponent, and I can't imagine the voters in this county would re-elect him at this point.
Would that have to wait that long? Because if this thing kind of escalates, I mean, is there any mechanism involved for him to be removed from office if they do find out that he was untoward and did something that compromised the investigation of this bug?
Absolutely. And I hope that's the outcome of this. But I'm just saying, if that doesn't work, the fallback option would be to trust the voters and let them right the wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was told by someone that even when he got elected, he wasn't officially accredited yet when he got elected.
No, he had never been a full-time law enforcement officer at the time of his election. They've actually changed the law, so if he were to run today, he would not have been eligible.
Who made that law to be able to run a sheriff's department? I mean, you're not even an accredited police officer.
Yeah, I don't know. He had been a reserve deputy, was my understanding, but he had never been a full-time officer. He had never been to CLEAT training, which is a council on law enforcement education.
Mm-hmm. We are fully familiar with that. And,
Yep.
I think that seems to be another issue and I feel bad for that community because they're getting people that are poorly trained and they don't have the skills set or training to really handle a lot of this stuff that's going on down there. Because especially nowadays, I mean, being a law enforcement, it's such a landmine. There's landmines everywhere, and they have to do everything to protect the public, but also be a trustworthy, honest cop, they're hard to find.
Right.
What's the answer down there? Do they have to? Is there any way they can pay for more training, fundraising, or do they have to pay police officers down there more in order to get better equipped, trained police officers and deputies?
I don't know where the funding is. I think that's the answer. I think if we're going to get quality people in law enforcement, we're going to have to pay them more. And if we pay them more, we could require more training because more people would be willing to undergo that training.
Yeah, because you deal with it on the boots on the ground every day, where you're dealing with all of these local departments and deputies and sheriff departments. We had someone on the podcast last week, and he had a great term for it. He goes, there's the 80-20 rule. It's like 80% of them are good, but 20% of them are bad. Is that kind of...
I would say that's pretty accurate. I would say that's probably a pretty fair percentage.
But the problem with that percentaging is the fact that you only need one bad one to make everything really bad.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And then, so what's your next step? I mean, you've basically alerted all the entities that you needed to alert. What's your next step if you don't hear back from them?
So I am still receiving information. I'm discovering that it seems Chris Bryant is not very popular among people that work for him and have worked for him. So I'm getting a lot of calls and Facebook messages and emails. I'm sifting through that. Some of them I think are just bitter former employees who are trying to reach at straws to come up with something, but some of them seem to have legitimate complaints. I am investigating those things as best I can, and if I feel confident enough that the information I receive is reliable, I will be releasing follow-up information on what I know so far.
Okay, great. And then when you investigate something, do you do that personally, or do you have hire an investigator that looks into this?
I've been doing most of it personally. I do have a couple investigators who have assisted me some, but as far as this goes, I haven't reached out to any of those yet.
Last question here, and I think we didn't ask this question here, but what was your reaction when you saw the camera up there?
I was disappointed. I mean, my hope was that the person that told me about it was wrong and that it was, just some wiring device or something innocent. But as soon as I saw it, I knew what it was. And I was sort of shock and anger. And then I started thinking about how many people I've met with in that room over the years. And I would imagine I've personally met with probably at least a couple hundred people in that room. And I've had, a death penalty trial in this county. Every time I met with my client was in that room.
I mean, obviously you must work with Craig Ladd.
I do.
What is your opinion of him?
So Craig and I have never been friends. We don't get along. I'm probably one of his least favorite people in the world. Craig's a politician. would be the best way to describe him. I have always felt like Craig will do whatever is politically expedient for Craig. And I guess to some extent that's a good thing for someone who is a politician. I don't know whether he knew about this camera. I suspect that he did, but I hope that he didn't.
Yeah, that would be horrible if he did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The problem is you got who's really going to look into this, and who can you trust to look
Right.
into properly, and then does it just get caught up in this bureaucratic chain of nothingness that gets pushed down someone's desk? There's more for everyone to lose than to gain in this case on that side.
Right. Yeah. And him removing the camera probably ensures that they're never going to really have a good idea of where the feed was going and, if it had been active recently.
No, he had too much time.
Yeah.
There's too much time. You can't, as an investigator, it's kind of ridiculous that he removed it. If he really wanted a bipartisan investigation, he would have just called the OSBI and says, hey, listen, you got to come look at this.
Yep.
Don't
Absolutely.
move it. It's like, it's no different than having a piece of evidence laying on the floor,
Right.
with someone's fingerprints on it.
Yep.
You don't immediately pick it up. You leave it there
Right.
and you wait for other people to be there so there's witnesses to the process of the chain of evidence.
Right. And an elected sheriff who has now been through CLEAT training should know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't like it was a broken window somewhere.
With that information, just so for people who maybe don't understand the process, while you're in that room with your client, and if they're recording you, so they're getting all of that information ahead of time, that this privileged information. So not only is it a violation of their civil rights, but it also could potentially help them win their case.
Right. It could. And like I said earlier, I will have a client in jail and I will be negotiating a plea agreement. And so every time I get a new plea offer, I will have to go over and inform my client of the offer and see if they want to take it or not. And there have been countless times where I've gone to my client and they've said, yeah, I'll sign for whatever number of years. But I will say, well, let me make one more run at it. I can go tell the prosecutor that you're not interested and let's see if we can get a little bit better deal. And so if the DA is privy to that strategy, then that's obviously not going to work.
Yeah, you're showing your hand.
Right.
They're cheating. What has the local press down there been talking about? Have you been getting enough coverage for that?
So KXII and K10 both ran stories. They were fairly cursory. They basically reported what I told them and then reported Chris Bryant's explanation, and that was pretty much it.
Did they do it on the news? Did they do it on the news or was it on the website?
They did it on the news. It was actually, I think it was the top story on both channels.
That's good.
They did run that. But the station that did a pretty good job was KFOR in Oklahoma City. They came down and they weren't buying Chris's explanation. In fact, the reporter asked him, she had him on speakerphone, and she asked him why those light bulbs hadn't been changed in 20 years. And he stumbled around and made some statement about not being a maintenance man.
Yeah. We've actually been in that jail.
Yeah.
So
that's a good question.
That's a really good question.
So
yeah, they're tube light bulbs. So they last, I looked them up. It looks like 9 to 12 months on average. So
yeah,
certainly not a 20-year lifespan.
No, and I'm sure they weren't the most expensive fluorescent light bulbs. So they probably went out faster than that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's really interesting how the two counties, they can't get out of their own way. And that brings it to a different level of corruption where there's bugging involved.
Yeah.
We're interested in this story. I think not that it has a whole lot of connection to what we're doing, but I think it does thematically because of the area and the people. Because Carter County, they were investigators on this case, the Molly and Colt case. So
Right.
along with OSBI, Love County, Wilson, so they were all involved. So it'd be interesting to see what goes on down there after this, but this is definitely very interesting, and we support what you're doing. I think it's not easy to do what you're doing. We've been there. We know how hard it is to kind of call a foul when there's a foul, when you have so many other opposing people who don't want to ruffle any feathers, don't want to push anything, but this is serious. And I think the fact the way you've handled it, I think is the appropriate way. And I hope you get some investigation from OSBI, but sounds like you're prepared to take it even further if that doesn't happen.
Absolutely. I'm willing to take it as far as it needs to be taken because something has to be done.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much, Jason.
Yes, it was lovely to meet you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And if you have, if we hear anything from because we have a portal that, on our website too, on our Facebook page, and the same people that blew up our message boards when this happened, if we hear anything, people reach out to us quite a bit. We get a lot of tips from down there. We'll be more than happy to share them with you.
I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, listen, you have a good night.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
The holidays are a time to be with your families and give thanks, but it's also a time to think about the loved ones who are no longer with us.
Molly and Colt's families have been enduring the holidays for almost 10 years without them, which has to be very difficult. We wanted to check in with Paula to see how she's been dealing with the many unknowns in this case during the holidays.
We also wanted to get her perspective on the Carter County Chris Bryant story as well, since Paula has had many interactions with the sheriff about the Molly and Colt case. All right, well, listen, Paula, we wanted to have you on today because the holidays are approaching, and I'm sure with Molly and Colt missing, Molly and her family, and it's got to be a rough time every year when you're dealing with something like this. It's every day's a rough time with this case. It's a little tougher. So can you tell us a little bit about what the holidays are like in your family with this hanging over your head for as long as it's been hanging over your head?
Well, I never really spent any holidays with Molly. We've spent a couple of Thanksgivings together. That's pretty much it. But things are not the same. Prior to her grandfather passing, he had mentioned to me, it's not even worth celebrating anything anymore because it's just so difficult knowing there's always that one missing at the table. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So he struggled with that quite hard, and I know her mom and brother and her uncle do as well. So it's just nothing's the same. I mean, even though I didn't spend holidays with Molly, she's always in the back of my mind wondering what she would be doing now, because she'd be 27, right? 27.
Wow.
And would she have a child? Would she be having her own holidays and celebrations with her own children now? And unfortunately, we will never know. But those things go through my mind, especially now that she would be older. And it really stinks. It just stinks. It's horrible.
It is. It's awful. The holidays are hard enough as they are, but to not have any answers, I think that's the most difficult part of all of this for you, is to not know.
Well, yeah, next year's, 10 years now. It's just been too much. This past year, especially, it just seems like I've been doing the podcast and speaking with a lot of people, and locals in law enforcement and nationwide law enforcement. And this year has just been difficult. It's brought on a lot of anxiety for me. I know, because I know there's a lot more movement in the case now because of everything that's going on right now. And it's just this year, I just really hope every year it's like by the end of the year we're gonna know. You know what I mean? So it's like by Christmas, that's my Christmas wish.
I think we are close this year, though. I do feel that there's a lot of movement happening and that we could be closer than you've been. Do you think that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's definitely more eyes on the case than ever has been. And so with that, it is bringing forth more answers that eventually we'll be able to speak of, but it is bringing on a lot more movement in the case. So I'm really hoping by the end of the year, we have some sort of answers.
Speaking of movement, there's been some movement down in Carter County over the last couple weeks with that story about Chris Bryant, the sheriff down there, and discovering a bug in the attorney room. We just spoke to, just earlier on the podcast, the lawyer who heard about it, discovered it, and made a public statement about it and has been on the news about it. What have you been hearing about it from on your end about what's going on?
Everything I'm really hearing about it is pretty negative. People are very upset over this. I know Chris personally. I've been able to talk to him regarding Molly's case in the past and go to him for help. And it's very discouraging for me if in fact, he knew that that was there and that it's been utilized by him in some sort of way, because it just goes back to everything we've dealt with in Molly's case, even though that has nothing to do with Molly's case, but it just goes back to the people we're dealing with, and they're not to be trusted, and they're put in that position as to be trusted. They were elected into that position. So I'm really praying that that is not the case here. And I guess I don't know what's going on behind the scenes as far as the investigation into that, or if there will be prosecution of that or of Chris for that. I don't know how all of that works, but I'm just really, really hoping, because to be quite honest, I trust Chris for the most part. I can't say that there's been a whole lot done on Carter County's part where Molly's case is concerned. I've turned over evidence to them in the past, cell phones that I've obtained and such, that I've really never gotten any answers on as to what happened with this information that I've turned over to them. So there hasn't been a real, they've always been very nice, very cordial to me. But as far as getting anything done, if they have, I'm not aware of it.
I think what's really unfortunate about discovering this, it just unveils that the corruption seems to be kind of a way of doing things down there. And not paint a broad brush here, but that's a pretty big thing to do, is bugging an interview room for an attorney and client room where they're hearing privileged information. Jason was telling us earlier on the podcast that it breaks a lot of rights. It's a civil rights violation, and that it exposes so many other things, and it opens up the door for the 200 interviews that he had in that room over the course of 13 years, that cases may have to be looked at again. And so it doesn't really bode well for the district attorney in that area, Chris Bryant in that area, and then the overall trust of people feeling like they are getting their justice done properly.
Does it make you nervous, Paula, that you gave them some evidence?
It does. And a few months ago, after one of the podcasts, I'd received a phone call from OSBI. And, we were talking about things. And I had told him about, one of the things was I told him about a cell phone that I turned over to Carter County. Now, just to be completely honest, I've never asked anybody at Carter County for that phone back. But I've never really, how I obtained it and who I obtained it from, that cell phone to me could be very relevant in this case. I've never asked for it back or anything, but when I did ask if there was anything on the phone, I was told there was nothing. And I asked, where's the phone now? And they said it was in their desk drawer. I told OSBI that they should get that phone and do some forensics on that phone to see if they could retrieve any of the information. They have the resources Carter County doesn't to do that type of thing. So whether they followed through with it after we spoke, I don't know. But
so wait a minute, they admitted to you that they have the phone and it's just sitting in a desk drawer. It hasn't been tagged and bagged as a crucial piece of evidence. They said they didn't find anything on it. So they're just sitting in the drawer?
I've given them a phone as evidence that needs to be looked into because it is very relevant because of the person that it belonged to at the time. And so, but I don't know how it was tested or anything to see if they could obtain anything off of it. Now, this will go back to an interview or a recording that you guys played just a few weeks ago. The girl talking about the pictures. I was told that on this phone that I turned over were these pictures, kind of like what this girl described on that recording that y'all played a few weeks ago.
Okay.
So I told the OSBI a few weeks ago, they had called. I had told him that he needed to go pick up that phone from the Carter County Sheriff's Office and do some sort of forensic analysis or whatever they do on that, because they have the technology there to retrieve that information. And this has been, I think it was 2018 that I turned that phone over.
And so there's still no record of that phone being picked up by anybody now. It's just, according to what you know, it could still be in that drawer somewhere.
As you guys know, I haven't spoke to OSBI since that day. So I don't know if they picked it up or not. I have not asked.
So wait a minute. You gave them what could possibly be a piece of evidence and they put it in a drawer? They didn't tag it and put it in a bag and put it in an evidence locker or anything secure?
Apparently not, because I recall asking where it was. I was face to face with them actually when I was up there for some reason. I asked them about the phone. They told me that there had been nothing on it. They were not able to retrieve anything off of it. And I said, well, where is it now? And they said it was in their desk drawer. Now, I took it to them bagged and tagged with the date and time and location and person I received it from. I did all that prior to handing it over. I had been told, you ever retrieve any evidence, they told me how to handle that evidence. I bagged it in a paper bag. I put who the phone belonged to, who I received it from, the date, the time, the location that I received it. To my knowledge, it was never fully looked into. Like I said, Carter County doesn't have that technology, but OSBI would.
Well, hopefully they have it. That's all you can hope for, is that they have it. As we know that they don't share information for obvious reasons. They don't want to corrupt the investigation. But let's hope they have it. Hopefully got some information off of it. It's disturbing to hear the news coming out of Carter County last week that this lawyer down there, defense attorney down there, criminal defense attorney down there, Jason May, he's going full out to do the investigation here. Nothing's going to stop him, I think. And I think that's because I can tell he's angry about having to be put in this position.
Well, as he should be. I mean, my gosh, I've only met Jason one time, and that was at the courthouse during Sabrina's preliminary hearing, and seemed like a very nice guy. I've never heard anything but wonderful things about him as a person and as an attorney. Good for him for not letting these people intimidate him. That is great. I'm glad he's going to investigate it fully, because we need to know who we're speaking to. If that's been utilized since Chris Bryan has been in that department, that is terrible. That is just absolutely terrible. Hopefully that is not the case. That'll just kind of,
I know.
You
don't want to think of the worst here at this point, because then it just kind of makes everything much worse. If you're thinking, well, if they were doing that, what else would they have done?
Mm-hmm.
And
I know.
And the one thing that Jason was telling us, I asked him, I go, do you think the DA's office knew about this? And he goes, I hope to God they didn't. He goes, but I'm thinking they probably did. So, which is another problematic thing. So hopefully none of this, hopefully it was what he said it was. The prior sheriff put it in there for one case, for some thing that they wanted to observe, and then it wasn't removed for some reason. But it's hard to believe it's been sitting there for 20 years and no one's noticed it.
And the light bulbs don't last 20 years.
Exactly. That's the other thing that he said. He goes, someone has to change the light bulbs, and they're easily visible if you look up. Jason said when he walked in there, he goes, I never look up when I go in there. Who looks at the lights? He looked up and he can actually see it.
Wow.
And the fact that he removed it himself, Chris Bryant removed it himself, and instead of calling another department and having witnesses of seeing it being removed and used as evidence and chain of evidence, I think is highly problematic as well. Because if you didn't have anything to do with it and you weren't aware of it, then it just makes you look like you're trying to cover something up.
Right.
So.
Well, that's exactly what I thought when I heard that he had removed it. I thought, oh, good Lord, why would you do that? Because that is some serious stuff right there. Think of all the cases, all these people that are in prison who have had meetings with their attorneys in that room. They have rights to an appeal now. If they can determine that that's been in use for 20 years, that's 20 years worth of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'd heard that same thing about the DA's office possibly knowing that it was there and that type of thing. And something that came to mind that I've heard over and over and over about Craig Ladd is he only takes on the cases he can win, because of his goal is to seek a political career. The more cases he's won, the better off he is at getting. My thought was, does he have such a good record? Or I don't know what his record is as far as winning his cases, but does he have that because he has the inside scoop on what they're planning here because of the information that came out of that attorney-client room?
Well, it begs that question. That's for sure. And I think, the problem is, and I think Jason was having a problem with this, he's just hoping that it gets the proper investigation it needs. Because right now, he said that OSBI is just looking into, because he said they have very strict rules on what they can investigate. And he said they're looking at it to identify the recording device, to kind of timestamp it, and to see if it actually worked. Other than that, that's all he's been given as far as the information. The fact that this could just kind of be diluted with time and Chris Bryant has 2 more years left in his term. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's really frustrating, but I think Jason's the type of person I think is not going to let it go because he has a lot at stake here. He said he had a couple capital case that he was doing in there, one of them which was a death penalty case, and that's super high stakes. I mean, going to prison for anything you do, but like the death sentence that's a big deal, and if that affected the outcome of anything like that's huge.
Yeah, it is.
Because we've been dealing with wrongful convictions for quite some time.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
and it's easy to do.
It's easy for them to kind of get someone to write out a confession, even if they're not guilty. If they were privy to any information that could help them do that, you could wrongfully convict someone to the death penalty. I mean, that's shocking. And that's something that needs to be looked at on a federal level. Because if this corruption is going on in this state, then that needs to be examined from an outside law enforcement agency. I mean, this is just like ridiculous. It just keeps going on and on. I mean, there's Joe Russell, that county, completely all these dark stains on that law enforcement agency in Love County. And now Carter County is the same thing. We're having the same thing happening here, unraveling this stuff. It really looks like it's time for someone outside to look at this a little more closely.
I agree.
Yeah. It explains a lot of the failures that happened early on in the Molly and Colt investigation. Because if they're doing all this stuff and they're doing all this illicit stuff and illegal stuff, I mean, they're not really doing their job properly. So it explains why certain things weren't done.
Well, yeah.
It doesn't give a whole lot of confidence in their capabilities in investigating anything. And if they do find somebody that they want to railroad, this is the easiest way to do it. Put them in a room that's bugged, listen to what their attorney's saying, and then, they got a slam dunk case.
Mm-hmm. Right. How easy for the prosecutor if he has all the information ahead of time.
That's what I'm saying. I've heard it so many times that's what he was seeking, a political career. And Molly's case is not a case that he wants to take on because he doesn't feel like he can win it. And this is a big case. He loses this case. How does that affect his political career? When he's got a good streak going on after, this is all hypothetical. Let's say he's got a good streak going on because he knows what's been going on in that attorney-client room. And then he hears Molly's case that is just, we know how it is. It's so messed up. And it will take a lot to prosecute, but not with somebody who's got drive and determination that can put it out there.
Yeah.
Well, people have been prosecuted for less. I mean, we've seen it. We've seen it. I mean, we've seen it multiple times. It's very frustrating.
All we can hope for is that it gets investigated properly, and hopefully it was what Chris said it was. It was there by his former ex-father-in-law, who was the sheriff there. Obviously, the two people that can't really talk about it, his ex-father-in-law, who was the sheriff, is deceased. And the excuse they say that why it was put in there, said it was a DA back then before Craig Ladd, who put it in because some woman whose son was in jail was going to come in there with a hacksaw blade and give it to him so he can escape, and they got a tip about it and they wanted to get her on tape. According to Jason said you would need a warrant for that, first of all, and that would have to come from a judge, not a DA, number one. And number two, after the operation, or the sting operation, it would have been removed right away.
Right.
They could have left it in there. I don't think they forgot about it, but maybe they just did it for that and then maybe just left it in there and see what they got. Now, it'd be interesting, the fact that Chris Bryant removed it prior to giving it to the OSBI and bringing it to the OSBI. Where was the feed to that camera and that microphone going to?
Yeah.
You don't know.
I wondered that same thing. I know.
Where does it go?
Yeah.
Is it going into the sheriff's office? Is it going somewhere else? I mean, this is 2002. It could have been sent somewhere outside the jail. Mm-hmm. These are all questions that are very complicated and frustrating that probably will never have answers for.
It's really frustrating because just when you think there's people that you can trust and then you find out you can't, it's been that way for 9.5 years now. You confide in these people and then find out I made a mistake.
This has to be extraordinarily frustrating for you because you're trying to find out what happened to Molly and Colt, and you're cooperating with all these law enforcement agencies. And one by one, they're disappointing you, and now you can't trust them.
Right. It is very frustrating because I build a good rapport with some of these people. And still, once I find out I can't, that's it for me. I move on. I don't sit there and harp on it because there's been a lot that in law enforcement that I have trusted with information that I should have never trusted. I guess I was very naive, and it took me years to figure this out. But it's like, what the heck? I just want somebody that's going to sit there with me through to the end that I can trust with this information, and they're going to get the job done. I'm not going to find out all this other stuff that, I mean, there's been several with some pretty traumatic personal issues going on, or this thing with the bug being found in that attorney room. And there's just a lot of different things that I've heard, reasons I can't trust them anymore. And it's just really, really hard.
Well, you can't really blame yourself. I mean, because you've never been in this situation before. You've never had to deal with police officers in a double homicide murder investigation of a family member. I mean, and it's not mutually exclusive to Love and Carter County. I mean, we had Drew Kessie on last week. He dealt with the same thing in a big city Orlando police department, which has like a top-notch homicide department, tons of resources, and he got the same treatment. He trusted them in the beginning. He was feeding them information, because he was very, very much like yourself. He was very proactive and trying to find out what happened to his lovely daughter, and he got the same thing. So it's not mutually exclusive to you. So I don't think you should be beating yourself up. Most people, when they're dealt with a situation like this, you go to the law enforcement, you want them to help you. You have to trust that they're going to do everything in their power to help you find what happened to your loved one. And when that trust is broken, that's a really tough thing to repair, because now it's like you can't trust anybody. And you still have to find out what happened. And you hope that there's people out there that will assist you in this. And you've had to go out and find people, just like Drew has had to go out and find people and create their own investigation team and do other things. And you've been doing it in the past, and you're going to be doing it in the future, and you're going to do whatever it takes. And even with that, if you should find something, you will need to bring it to those people. Whether it's remains, you're going to have to call a medical examiner. You're going to have to include them in on this, because there's no way around it. You just hope to God that they treat it the way it needs to be treated.
And remember that Molly's a person, not an object.
Right. Well, luckily, I have got to meet the medical examiner on multiple occasions at the missing persons day that they have yearly up until COVID. She is an incredible person. And anytime I have found anything, I will take pictures and send it to her. And she replies within minutes. Her name's Angela Berg, and she's just incredible. So if she is on, the one sent out on this case, I know Molly will be treated as probably one of her own, because she's known Molly for almost 10 years now.
Well, that's good to hear.
In a different way.
That's good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's all crazy. I don't know what's going on down there. One of the things that was surprising to me that Jason revealed to us is the fact that a few years ago, probably around the time that Molly and Colt went missing, the crime rate in that area was one of the highest in the country per capita in that small little area.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, if we go back to the beginning of this case, in those early days, Paula, there was a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah.
A lot. And I'm sure it's hard to remember everything, but you're pretty good at remembering everything. I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. You remember everything. I remember that you mentioned once to us that there was people on Molly's Facebook page who started disappearing off Facebook, that just kind of wiped their Facebook clean, took off, left town. There's a lot of people out there who know what happened, independent of the small group of people that we've been talking about.
Right. Well, early on in the first days, we were told there was a party. We've been told that it was there's a few locations that we were told this party could have been. We were told about one out at Mud Creek, what they call that Mud Creek Project. There was that party that went on. And so I'm not from the area, remember, so I don't know what that entailed or where it was. We were told that the party could have possibly been at a home of a man who has a son Con's age on Pike Road. We were told it was on the Nent property. We were also told it was at a place on Bronco Road. So we've never been able to determine exactly where this party was held, but somebody got me a list together of people that they knew would be involved or be at one of these parties. They're typical teenagers that would be going to these parties, or early 20s, that around that age frame. And so I started scouring Facebook for these kids' Facebook pages, and I found their Facebook pages. But the funny thing about it would be in 2013, let's say from January to June, they posted every single day, multiple times a day. Then from July, August, September, it's kind of gone. It's not kind of gone, it's gone. Or just the whole month of July is gone. Or the whole year of 2013 is gone. It was just the strangest thing. And I'm not talking just one of these people. I'm talking about everybody on that list that was given to me of people that could have been at this party where Molly would have been, or where she was.
And then didn't some people just literally their families moved out of the state, sold their businesses?
There's 3 people. Yeah. There's 3 people I can think of off the top of my head who left the state immediately after she went missing and just never came back. Their parents moved them away. It was very strange because of the things I was being told about these particular people and their involvement with con and partying it up, and this type of thing. It was very odd to them that these people would just up and move.
Well, I think from a parent's perspective, even if they had any kind of relationship to anybody close or being mentioned this thing, I know I would do the same thing. I would say, listen, you're not hanging around with these people anymore. In fact, we're moving, and just to protect, because they don't want their kids to end up like Molly and Colt. So I understand that protection that you want to provide for your family member. So I get it, because this is.
Well, I understand that, but it seems a little drastic to move out of state.
Well, maybe they saw something, Paula. They probably saw something.
Exactly.
They saw something.
Or they knew something.
Or they knew something. And that's the thing. Like, this was, almost 10 years ago. So if any of those people are listening, if you do know anything and you did see anything, don't you think it's time to say something about it? Because this poor family is still suffering from this. Right. While everybody else moved on and moved away and lived their lives, Molly's dead. Colt is dead. Right. They're not coming back. So it's time to say something if you know something.
In my opinion, there's nothing to be fearful of. I was thinking about this today. I was thinking that outside of, physically harming me, there's nothing anybody could do that is worse than what has happened to me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I was thinking that today because I was thinking about some of the kind of threats we've been getting, or do you know where I'm going with this?
Yes.
So that does not matter. There's nothing that they could do that would be any worse than this. It would not stress me out. The threats that are being made, that stuff does not stress me out, simply because what we're going through already is the worst of the worst. It's like, bring it on, because it's just too much.
I mean, you've had to deal with death from 1,000 cuts. Most people, when they lose a loved one, it's, whether it's a disease or a car accident or any kind of horrible, horrible tragedy, they know what happened. But because you just sort of know what happened, they're not coming back, you know they're not alive, but you don't know what happened. We still don't know what happened. With all these theories, with everything that we've put out there, the recordings and everything like that, all the people that you've interviewed and police have interviewed, we still don't know what happened. So it's all still hypothetical and speculative. So to have to live with all that doubt in your brain day in and day out and not knowing, it's torture.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And I think a perfect example of that, you're not alone. I mean, you could hear it in Drew's voice last week.
Oh, yeah. And knowing both of you, it's the same story, and it's horrifying. It's horrifying. Yeah. And so it's just awful.
It's destroyed our family. Absolutely destroyed our family. All of the relationships, none of it's the same. And so, I say that they couldn't do anything worse, but, they took Molly from us. Instead of us being able to all keep it together, to support one another, we've kind of just gone at each other. And so therefore, I don't know if any of it's repairable when it's all said and done, when it's all over. And it will be. When it's all said and done, I don't know if any of these relationships are repairable. I pray it is, but it's been rough, especially in the past 2 years, year and a half. Been really rough.
Yeah.
So
all we can hope for is some resolution here. And like we said before, I think we feel like we're getting close. And like you said, never before has law enforcement been more focused on this case. And we're praying for them to come to some sort of resolution and hopefully find answers to this horrific crime for Molly and Colt, and to eventually hopefully bring their bodies home as well. So people can have funerals and people can put this to bed and move on with their lives and find out what happened and bring the people to justice. And I think that's really important. And I think that's the only thing you can really be thankful for this Thanksgiving. I think all we can do is pray on that. And we wish you and your family a wonderful Thanksgiving. All we can say is that there's good things coming. I think the work is being done, and we just have to be confident that this will come to fruition and we will get a resolution and bring those young people home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving as well.
Thank you, Paula. Big hugs to you and all your family.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
Our investigation into the case of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes continues. We're going to be sorting through tips, and we are going to be speaking to new experts in law enforcement and the legal field from around the country who will hopefully help us unravel this mystery.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
For any tips relating to the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, please contact 833-4-MOLLY and Colt, and they will be directed to the proper law enforcement agency.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.